Good afternoon. My name is Brenton Garrett, and my graduate student literature presentation will be from the paper entitled The Smartphone as a Pacifier and Its Consequences by Sarah Diefenbach and Kim Borman from the proceedings of the 2019 CHI Conference on Human Factors in Computing Systems. In the research study, researchers wanted to validate the hypothesis that the smartphone is essentially an adult pacifier, enabling adults to cope with negative emotions and boredom. From 2012 to 2017, the average daily time millennials worldwide spent on mobile internet apps increased from 107 to 223 minutes. Needless to say, such an increase in the usage of technology would have a material effect on how young people interact with technology and the world around them. HCI research found positive correlation between intensity of smartphone use and personality traits such as capacity for solitude. For many of the individuals with these personality profiles, the imagination for being without one's phone appears even more stressful and extremely inconvenient. Findings such as these suggest smartphone usage may seem more or less attractive depending on one's personality structure. Most statistics on smartphone usage do not differentiate between diverse situations of usage. An observational study found that 62% of the individuals who were waiting alone in public spaces used their phones, while less people who were engaged in conversations did so. Such a finding appears to correlate to times of general boredom, not just when waiting around for the next activity. A study by SITH shows that 93% of the 18 to 29-year-olds use their smartphones to avoid boredom at least once during a 1-week study period. McNally and Harrington found that right before bed, young adults watched videos to relax, relieve stress or boredom, or to wind down. Myself, being a millennial, I can completely relate to this statement. For a number of years, I would find myself lying in bed and watching a familiar show or comedy to ease my mind from the stress of the day. I started to notice some of the drawbacks of such a habit. Sometimes I would forget my headphones and I would fall asleep with the noise blaring all night, or the blue light would strain my eyes, leading me to actually need eyeglasses. So this new culture of avoiding boredom and occupying one's experience with mobile interaction may have negative effects. Not engaging in boredom and solitude might negatively affect creativity and self-reflection. Sherry Turkle, a psychologist and tech critic, argues the disrespect for solitude might have detrimental effects on people's capacity to self-reflect. Just as an example, I myself have experienced the freedom to self-reflect when there was no phone to distract me. For about a year when I was 21, I didn't have a cell phone due to falling on some hard times. So my then girlfriend, now wife, would let me keep in contact with friends and family through her phone. But the freedom of not having a phone was super therapeutic. Feelings of loneliness and attachment to some kind of device or outlet is not a new concept. This concept has been studied in numerous fields such as behavioral psychology. One famous theory is Bowlby's theory of attachment, which investigates the relationship between children and their primary caregiver. The research suggested that if the primary caregiver responds to the child's needs adequately, the caregiver acquires the role of an attachment object with the ability to provide a sense of security to the child, whereas separation from at least the stress. If the primary caregiver is not available, children search for compensatory attachment objects, which could be other people or also other objects, i.e., a pacifier or even a smartphone. The relationship that many adults have with their smartphones in times of boredom draw many parallels with Bowlby's findings. One can conclude from the research that children who grew up with healthy outlets such as outdoor activities, reading books, and spending quality time with friends may struggle less with using a smartphone as an attachment device as an adult. This point is particularly or this point particularly resonates with me on a personal level. When I was 12, I was very much into skateboarding and couldn't think of doing anything else in my life at the time. I had friends and family, but for some reason, I was really attached to the idea of having my thing. Uh, so, uh, Ironically enough, I broke my leg skateboarding in the summer between sixth grade and seventh grade, and I couldn't skateboard anymore, or at least I couldn't skateboard for the summer. So, Bowlby's conclusions about uh, his conclusions are pretty relatable to me because I ended up getting really into fingerboarding. So for I'd say like 4 hours or more a day, I would do tricks on books, chairs. I even had a little ramp that I made out of cardboard and electrical tape. So by the time I got to seventh grade, I was playing games of fingerboard horse. They called it games of skate. So it's much like horse, but you spell out the letters using skate, skate. And I'd play that against other kids, and I would actually win the majority of the time because I spent so many hours uh, fingerboarding when I broke my leg. So all that to say, attachment to objects and finding a compensatory attachment object was very much a real thing in my personal experience. If assuming that for some people the smartphone functions as an attachment object, its separation should cause symptoms of stress and anxiety, while its proximity should provide comfort and stress relief. One quick, one interesting, uh, one interesting line from a qualitative study by Forward. Participants said that their smartphones were like friends, and the thought of losing their phone made them anxious. As previously mentioned, certain personality profiles have shown to be impacted more by smartphone use than others. Capacity of solitude is the ability to be mentally separate from others without acting on impulsiveness or feeling negative emotions like loneliness or fear. Individuals who possess less capacity of solitude are shown to turn their smartphone devices uh, from comfort and relief from boredom. Furthermore, the way we experience solitude is likely to influence whether we turn to our smartphones in alone times. The need to belong is another relevant personality factor for smartphone use. Generally, people with higher need to belong experience more loneliness in situations of solitude. In an ethnographic HCI study by Aaron and Briag, one participant labeled the kind of habitual smartphone use as a prison, since you can get lost in your phone and can't get out. For many participants, the imagination for being without one's phone appears even more stressful and extremely inconvenient. In the realms of work uh, and academic performance, a correlation study also found a negative association between cell phone use and academic performance. An experimental study showed that the mere presence of a smartphone reduced cognitive capacity, especially for those users with a higher dependence on the phone. A survey by Drago found that 85% agreed to the statement that present technology impairs interpersonal communication. And this last finding is relevant to how me and my wife interact in the car whenever we run an errand. I'm usually busy through the day, and I don't get to talk to her or see her until I'm off work. So I do work from home, but she's wrangling the kids, cooking or cleaning, so I have to wait patiently for my opportunity to talk to her. So the thing that we're struggling with right now is our communication in the car. So I have this idea that uh, we'll get to talk in the car since we have a hard time getting together during the day. Uh, the interesting thing is whenever I look over, she's glued to Facebook or some kind of social media app. So full disclosure, I don't consider her a social media addict, but by any means. But every time in the car, like clockwork, she's glued to her phone. So we ended up talking about it, and I told her kind of what I wanted to accomplish, and I'd like to talk to her during the ride home. So if Drago's findings on how technology impairs interpersonal communication has impacted our home, I can only imagine what it's like for people who are not as observant of how these findings have an impact on their communication. The aim of the study is to contribute to the field of human-computer interaction by revealing more insight into smartphone usage in different usage venues, how smartphone usage affects self-reflection, and the different personality profiles that are affected the most in different venues of usage. Prior to the main study, a qualitative pre-study consisting of 3 focus group sessions were performed. 2 days prior to the focus groups, participants were asked to observe themselves the next day and to note down at least 5 incidences of personal smartphone usage, including motivations for smartphone use and context factors. The purpose of this exercise was to understand the relevance of smartphone usage during alone time. In the focus group sessions, participants discussed reasons for smartphone usage and situation-specific unwanted side effects. The discussion was led by 2 guiding questions. Why do you use your smartphone? And in which situations are you using your smartphones? And how does this impact your respective situation? A central finding of the exercise was that alone time appeared as one typical situation of smartphone usage. Some argued that alone time was the best time to use the phone. The exercise revealed that some people might deliberately choose to use their phone while being alone rather than while being with others, and thus confirms alone time as a relevant context of study. This last finding seems to have a lot of nuance. The choice to use one's phone, not in the company of friends or family, may be due to not wanting to appear rude. I know in my family, being glued to my phone in the presence of parents is viewed as particularly rude. I often find myself looking at notifications and responding to various noises coming from my phone. I would argue that spending time with family, interacting with my device are pretty mutually exclusive. Um, and I can also relate to the idea that using my phone or using my device while alone is a pretty solid finding. I find myself using my phone between breaks, while waking up from a nap, and any opportunity where there's an empty space. So this finding is particularly interesting. Data was collected through an online survey with the software Unipark. 339 individuals, 271 were female, took part in the study and completed the whole study. Most of the 294 were students of diverse study subjects. The mean age was 21.2, a standard deviation of 3.09, men of 17 and a max of 30. The researchers surveyed different measures related to smartphone usage and personality disposition. Most items were assessed on a 5-point Likert scale, 1 equal to disagrees and 5 equals totally agrees. For proneness to boredom, self-reflection, and self-insight, the researchers used a 7-point Likert scale. The researchers also took into account gender, age, occupation, and usage of different smartphone applications. The survey results suggested that the average total time of smartphone usage was more than 3 hours a day, with messaging apps and social media being the most used applications. The mean value of smartphone usage during alone time on the applied 7-point scale was 4.48 and significantly exceeded the natural scale midpoint. This indicates a general tendency to smartphone usage in moments of solitude. The findings also suggested that personality traits leading to negative emotions in moments of alone time are positively associated with smartphone usage in moments of alone time and vice versa. The perception of the smartphone as an attachment object was strongly positively related to smartphone usage during alone time. Self-reflection was not significantly related to smart time usage during alone time. Self-insight was negatively related to smartphone usage during alone time. The study found that people with less capacity for solitude, higher need to belong, and higher proneness to boredom also reported more frequent smartphone usage during alone time. These results are in line with other research positively linking the need to belong and other behavioral traits to smartphone use in general. The researchers go further to suggest that it is possible to interpret the findings as people who are more prone to negative emotion during solitude are more likely to use their phones. The researchers pointed out in regard to correlation to personality factors, it is more likely to assume that personality traits influence smartphone usage as opposed to smartphone usage influencing personality traits, since personality factors are considered as rather stable. The research also revealed that most participants had the perception that the smartphone as an attachment object with the power to reduce negative emotions like stress, sadness, or boredom. Moreover, people who felt lonely or bored during alone time only turned to their smartphone if they believed that it will provide comfort, similar to a pacifier. A study by Sengalu and Greitmeyer found that Facebook users kept checking Facebook because they believed it would improve their mood, when in fact they felt worse after using it. The same study found that people spent more time on Facebook than they planned. I've spent more time on Facebook than I planned on a number of occasions. Sometimes I find myself stopping my work for a quick break and decide to scroll through Facebook to see what people are posting. Sometimes the wall feed elicits a feeling of reflection and gratitude, but oftentimes I feel negative feelings because there's a lot of noise. Each post has a number of responses, and I can't help myself but to take a look at what they're saying. Um, Before I know it, I'm a few minutes late for a meeting or an appointment or something like that. The study suggests that some applications of social media consumption could be supportive for self-reflective application, creating postings for a positive self representation, reading others' posts, and looking at one's own profile history could initiate self-reflection processes. In the limitations section of the paper, the researchers pointed out that the study focused on the generation of young adults, which were millennials. This generation might be especially susceptible for the effects of interest because they use smartphones more and differently than other generations. Um, just as a personal note, to talk about the millennial generation, um, there's been a lot of changes from the time that I was a kid to the young people growing up now. I can say that a lot of the older brother age people to me, and even people in my own age group, there was a time where before we had the internet, the only way we can watch programming was on a kind of a tube CRT TV, right? And the only way we could make a phone call was through a landline or a cord phone or a rotary phone for the older generations. So to go from that and to have one leg in that world and another leg in a world where I myself went to college in a time when Facebook was coming out and YouTube was blossoming, and so I actually have a perspective of appreciating both the old way of technology and the new way. And I can only imagine the struggles that the kids these days have, and that kind of informs the questions and the critiques that I have about the study. Um, uh, Further studies should try to replicate the findings with more representative samples and compare different generations. And one question that I would have would be, does the Z generation consume more internet or social media? Are they more distracted than millennials? I know the millennials have we at least have some kind of reference point to how to operate in a world without a phone. We came from a time when there was no Amazon and we had to rent books from a library, and maybe we might have some like a PlayStation or a Sega Saturn, but those days kind of lent themselves to maybe going out and playing, and I think millennials maybe had a chance to be really well adjusted. The Z generation is kind of the first generation where they're kids who were born in the Facebook era and the YouTube era. And do those kids and soon to be young adults, are they having trouble adjusting? Are they consuming more of those tech resources? And how does that compare to the findings from the millennial group? Another question I would have is maybe in 20 years, how does the usage of the alpha generation compare to their parents, which are the millennials? Do they consume less than the previous generation since their parents grew up in an age without the internet? And that would be a great question and a great question to investigate. Is my children are, I believe the term is alphas, right? So millennials or myself, Gen Gen Z or the young people who are in high school, and then the alphas are the really little kids. And since I have kind of a insight into what the world was like before, and I have a stronger sense of how the importance of being well adjusted, um, will I pass that on to my kids, and will studies kind of validate that hypothesis? And will my kids in turn be exist in a world where they're more well adjusted to the ample opportunities to get involved with technology? So those are kind of the questions, not so much critiques, but some of the questions that I would have for the next iteration of the study, or even for the study as it presently is.